There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I am your host, David Wilms. I've got Nephi Cole and Mike McGrady.
What's up?
Both here. Mm-hmm. It is 11:33 p.m. And the reason we are kicking this off at 11:33 p.m. is because we just spent an hour and a half recording a god-awful, atrocious podcast that we couldn't possibly release, and we need to rip it up and start over.
Yes.
So now we're going to do what we just did, what we tried to do in an hour and a half. We're now going to do it in 20 minutes.
Maybe 30, but we're going to do it way faster.
And better.
And way better. You won't know that, but trust us, this is going to be so much better. Mm-hmm. It was just not a good product. But we are here tonight, almost tomorrow morning, because we want to talk about the Tongass National Forest. And what we want to talk about, it really is recently the Trump administration through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Forest Service. That was an awful lot, wasn't it, Nephi?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's
Just
late.
keep going.
Okay. Anyway, the administration released a draft environmental impact statement. The intent of that draft environmental impact statement is to propose exempting the Tongass National Forest from the 2001 Roadless Rule that was issued by the Clinton administration.
The Roadless Rule. Perfect. From 2001, January 5th.
Yeah. And a lot of you probably have heard of both of these things. This proposal, it's been all over the news if you're following the conservation world, these issues. You're probably familiar with it. The Roadless Rule, unless you've been sleeping under a log somewhere, that's my attempt at a pun because we're talking about a forest. Unless you've been sleeping under a log somewhere, you've probably heard about the Roadless Rule. But in case you haven't, we're going to touch on both of those things during this podcast. Before we get to the details of this proposal and the likelihood of success and that Roadless Rule that led to this proposal in the first place, we want to walk you through a couple things. We're going to talk a little bit on this podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about first of all, we're going to talk about the geography. You need to know, what is the Tongass National Forest? Why is this such a big deal? Why is on both sides of this issue? We want to give you a little history of it, of the local economy up there, and then we want to get to talking about some of the regulations and laws that have been passed over the past 100 years that have led to the point where we are today. And we'll have hopefully then we can have a good discussion about about this proposal and the different sides of this proposal. So, what is the Tongass National Forest?
The largest national forest in the United States of America.
And how big is it?
17 million acres.
Almost 17 million acres.
Yep.
For perspective.
It's not the continental U.S.
No, but for perspective. It's almost 17 million acres, which is roughly the same size as the state of West Virginia. It is 3 times the size of New Jersey. It's more than 20 times the size of Yosemite National Park. And I know, so it was established, Nephi is being incredibly inappropriate over here, but it was established by Nephi's probably favorite president.
Theodore Roosevelt is my favorite president.
Yeah, established by Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, it started out as the Alexander Archipelago Reserve in 1902 were the first protections of the area. Then in 1907, we had the congressional, whatever you want to call the signing on the dotted line to make the Tongass National Forest.
Yeah, I don't even know if it had to be done through Congress.
Yeah, I think it was
just presidential order creating the national forest.
Seems like my guy, Teddy.
Yep.
He's not scared.
He's just a doer.
He's not scared.
Gets it all done, right? So where is it? So it's the largest national forest. You have an idea of the scale of it. It's actually the largest part of the largest temperate rainforest in I shouldn't say largest contiguous, really intact temperate rainforest in the world.
Fascinating geography and geology, soils. I know you'd like to hear all about those histosols, but I won't spend much time on the muskegs, which are really just bogs. But go ahead.
All right. So it's found, if you're familiar with Alaska, it's found on the tail of Alaska. What would you call it? I don't know. The peninsula,
we'll call it
appendage,
it's called the tail.
On the southeast side of Alaska, right? So
it'd be a proboscis.
Okay, on the southeast tail of Alaska, on the southeast side of Alaska, you have a series of islands. You also have these archipelagos. You also have
they look like fjords.
It's also almost, I think, between 11 and 13,000 miles of shoreline.
Just a ton.
A ton of shoreline.
Yep.
Massive glaciers. One of the most popular tourist destinations, one of the most popular glaciers is in this in the Tongass area.
Yeah. And so people know not
huge.
A whole lot of roads.
Not a lot, but you have Juneau is technically in the Tongass, right?
Yeah.
The capital of Alaska.
Do you know where that's at?
Do you know where Juneau is? Do you know where Juneau is?
It's Tongass National Forest.
Yeah, Alaska, right?
It's a big capital of about 31,000 people.
Yeah.
An interesting thing about the roads, though, just quickly, is that but a lot of the roads that even exist in that area were built for the purpose of resource extraction.
Yep, and we'll
because
get to that.
That's been part of the economy.
And we're going to get to that in just a second. Want to give one more piece of the geography before we get to the economy piece, right? So from a geography standpoint, talked about its location, its size. It's home to some of the most incredible wildlife resources in North America. And you hear, if you're like me, I know you guys have heard stories about the wildlife, the Sitka deer, the brown bears, the highest density of brown bears. Actually, I think it has the highest concentration of bald eagles too.
Yeah.
Just the wildlife resources of this area are second to none. And from a biomass standpoint, something that's cited frequently about this national forest. It's massive, biomassive, right?
Right.
So on a per acre basis, it has more biomass than any place else on the planet, including, and this blew my mind, including tropical rainforests. I always assumed tropical rainforests have the most biomass.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
But turns out that's not the case.
You gotta love histic soils. I know I do.
Oh, man. So anyway.
Rock on, Nathan.
Yeah, rock. Nice one. We have dad jokes after 11:30. Anyway, it's a really unique place, and some incredible wildlife resources, and it also has an economy like most places. And I know you want to talk a little bit about the economy, and it's the Nephi, and the economy is important to what the reason why we're talking about the decision today.
Yep. You want me to talk about?
Let's talk about the economy.
So the economy today, it's in a state of flux, and so you've had a traditionally, when Alaska in itself, you had a lot of resource extraction was a huge part of the economy. In terms of the timber industry, that was certainly the case.
And mining, right?
Timber industry, mining industry, that was the case for a long time. And now there's a shift now where people are talking very heavily about recreation as part of the economy. So outdoor recreation. And so when people look at that, what does that mean? Well, that means everything from the guy who's going on the iceberg to hunting to fishing to bird watching to whatever. A very tough change in the economy to kind of quantify, because you see tourism driving a big part of this. And of course, with tourism and the change to more to that outdoor recreation economy, you have a whole new kind of infrastructure, whole new kinds of demands in terms of, what people want there, what types of services are expected there in that area, how they're going to get there, how they're going to get around. And so this introduces a whole new level of complexity into managing 17 million acre forest, where traditionally, your management concerns were like, okay, where are we going to build a road to take timber out, right? But that's not the concern anymore.
Right, but before we talk about that, we do need to talk about that. I mean, that was the industry for a long, long time, right? I mean, timber was a big industry.
Yeah,
in the Tongass.
And the timber industry has changed over time in the Tongass. When you started out, you saw a lot smaller operations, saw cutting, individual operations. Then you had several large companies come in the mid 1900s, and pulp mills and just a change. And then with some changes in environmental regulations that we're going to talk about, I think, in shortly, you saw a different level of competition and a different level of cost to doing business in the Tongass that really changed the complexion of those companies and how they were able to operate. And as a result, change what people are doing for a living in that area, and to some degree.
Yeah, so you went from a forest when it was established in 1907 that was established under the mantra of Gifford Pinchot and Teddy Roosevelt. And Gifford Pinchot was the first head of the National Forest System, right? And the conservation mindset at the time was, we have this timber resource and we need to manage it sustainably, so we have a sustainable cash crop. We have a sustainable timber crop that can be replenished and we can continue to use it. And that was one of the reasons for establishing this forest then, right? And so that timber sustainability model was really, that's how the forest was managed. Where there was timber harvest, where there was viable timber harvest,
but
until you started having those environmental regulations.
Yeah, but you look at the cost of that, and the cost of that, has been changing. And so, depending on what you're going to do with that timber and what timber you want to get, you have different economic benefits to harvesting different timber in different ways in different areas. And for one of the, I think we'd agree that the most valuable resource in some of these forests is that old growth timber. Whether you're talking about from an environmental perspective or you're talking about from an economic perspective, in both cases, you're talking about some of the most valuable pieces. And by some estimates in the Tongass, that's been, 4% of the forest, and it's already been, 2/3 logged. And so that's one of the estimates that I'd read somewhere. How true it is, not sure. But that is one of the challenges that you face, is now when you look at how to manage these forests and manage which timber you want, sometimes the timber that you want the most may not be the easiest to get to and the most economical to pull off of there and then to plan for environmentally.
Right. And so let's talk about some of those environmental changes. Because I think when the forest was first set up, the value was really on the old growth forest, and people weren't really talking about the environmental values, right? Of having those.
Yeah, you're talking about
trees.
board feet of red cedar,
right? Well, is it red cedar up there?
Yeah,
Doesn't
Alaskan
matter.
Red cedar.
I know they have fir and
Yeah, they got some red cedar.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
There.
I'll trust you. I haven't been there. I don't know.
Doesn't sound like it.
I don't know. I'm making stuff up. I don't know.
All right, go for it.
Where he makes stuff up. Anyway, so the first major laws that really started coming into play were in the 1970s, and we've talked about a lot of the laws that impact, and we're not going to go into those in detail. But the 1970s is when you had from the late 60s on, you had your National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, right? You had the National Forest Management Act, and Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. There were a bunch of laws that came on the books then. We've talked about them in other podcasts. We're not going to go into them there. But the very specific laws that impacted this specific forest, 1971, we had the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, right? And this was, and you guys will correct me if I miss here, but this one was, you had the United States purchasing Alaska from Russia in 1867, Seward's Folly, right? But you had the native population in Alaska there that said, we didn't agree to that sale. That was our land that you went and we never sold it to. We never gave up title to Russia. We never agreed to a sale from Russia to you. It's not yours, it's ours. And so there was a big settlement about that, right? About
Native corporations became a big part of operating in Alaska.
Right. And Native corporations wound up with a lot of, instead of having reservations like the rest of the country, these Native corporations had they set up these corporations, they had communities, but they manage a lot of the resource, a lot of land area, right? And that's what was dealt with in the settlement. And some of the land within the Tongass National Forest became part of that Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And so now you had a new player in there making decisions, land management decisions. And that had some impacts on the timber industry. Right? 1980, Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. This act, without going into all the details, but it resolved a lot of the state claims with the federal government as far as state land, federal land, right? But it also set up in the Tongass a series of wilderness areas. You start seeing wilderness areas be established, and wilderness areas, there's no timber harvest, right? Those are off limits. Now, arguably, there was no timber harvest going on in these wilderness areas at the time, and that's one of the reasons why they were set up. But it could have an impact on the vitality of an industry if there are places that are now off limits, that you just know we can never develop there. Fast forward again, so that was in 1980. 1990, you had the Tongass Timber Reform Act. That added additional wilderness area, and I think it brought it to or close to the number today, which is, 19 wilderness areas, different wilderness areas within the Tongass National Forest. Mm-hmm. There are also 2 national monuments within the national forest. So all of these are set-asides. All of these areas, the national monuments, the national, these wilderness areas, these are set-asides. Can't develop there. Can't do any kind of timber harvest there. So again, it's further limiting area where there could be timber harvest. One of the things that maybe had an even bigger impact than some of those laws on the timber industry was in 1997, where the Tongass Land Management Plan was amended, and the Forest Service switched to an ecosystem-based management approach to the national forest, as opposed to maybe the way that had been done before, which was more economic-based, market economy-based. And here ecosystem management was really saying there are going to be prescriptions. There are going to be certain things that you can and can't do when you're doing a timber harvest. And maybe you have to leave certain snags or stumps, or you have to leave standing trees, or you have to have a buffer around streams, and and environmental considerations.
There's a history to that too, and that history goes from all the way from the 70s and some of the early lawsuits down through the 90s. It comes into that to the act, the Tongass Timber Reform Act that you talked about, in terms of buffer strips around streams, and it just continues to grow. So this environmental awareness and this realization of the things that you have to do to preserve the other activities occurring on the forest, that understanding continues to grow over time, and with it, the cost and complexity of doing business there.
Nephi, what's a snag?
A snag? Just like a dead tree kind of kicked over sideways. And
okay. It can create habitat for raptors or pine martens or all sorts of things.
Snag-dependent species.
Snag-dependent species.
I wrote a brief one time that had to use
Did
the
you?
word. Yeah, snag-dependent species.
I still remember when you took over that job.
Yeah. So much for 20 minutes, people.
And you came into my office. Yeah, sorry, we'll get there. But you came into my office and what was it? It was like, what is a lek?
Yeah,
we were talking. Yeah. You're doing sage grouse work. Goes, what's a lek?
Yeah. I might even ask how to pronounce it.
Yeah. Is that an acronym for something? No.
Yeah,
right. You've come a long way.
Whip it and spurn. Let's roll. Let's roll.
Right. I was commending Mike for coming a long way. Now he's using snag and briefs. And
21 minutes.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So we just talked about this switch to ecosystem management and the impact that could have on the timber industry. Next big piece is the 2001 Roadless Rule.
Mm-hmm. This is a great thing because this affects everybody. It does not just affect the Tongass. And so if you are around a national forest anywhere, you have been in one of these arguments about the roadless rule.
It disproportionately does, though, impact Alaska.
Is it because it's the
because
17
it's
million
gigantic
acres?
state? But so the roadless rule, what it did was it banned new roads on more than 58 million acres of national forests that were already road free.
Yeah, like 2% of the United States.
Yeah,
Like that.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom, like that.
and of that 58 million acres, 22 of it was in Alaska.
And how much did that? How much time did that? How long did it take for that to go through Congress?
Exactly 0 minutes, because it was as you're teeing this up nicely, it was a last-minute executive action by President Clinton on his way out the door.
Well, I mean,
15 days left in office, to be fair.
It was part of a rulemaking package.
Sure.
And so it was put out, and there was analysis, there was an opportunity to comment, and as the train went by, you could comment on the train, and then it was put into final rule just in the 2 weeks left in an administration.
Somewhat amusing.
Actually it went final rule on January 12th, so 8 days before the next president took over.
Somewhat amusing is that this is one of the big beefs that Utah had, was around the same period of time, right? When they got Grand Staircase Escalante.
Yeah, absolutely
the exact
was.
same.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's common for presidents to do on their way out the door.
Sure. Trying to get to wrap everything up.
That is not uncommon, and it's
That and eating at McDonald's.
not uncommon for that president. But he wanted,
Or did you know in the White House that they went through the day before and they pried out the W off of every keyboard of every computer in the White House because George W. Bush took over.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that story.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah. So
Wow, that's funny.
So the roadless rule kind of came into its being in 2001, as we mentioned, at the end of the Clinton administration, and it had a variety of sort of. It was actually really short. It's only a couple of provisions long, but the point is that it is sort of a blanket prohibition on road construction, road reconstruction, in certain inventoried roadless areas, and it also would prohibit timber cutting in some of those same areas. However, there's always exemptions in anything. So someone in a local level can make a decision that says, okay, well, we really need to get in there. This is just like a one-time harvest, or for some particular reason to get in and allow for either, just one vegetation management project or another, but not as a general rule. The other thing that was interesting about the roadless rule is that they allowed for states to write their own rule if they wanted to make a proposal to get an actual specific rule that was tailored to their local state, but it was on a statewide level. And the Tongass National Forest was specifically mentioned in the roadless rule as an opportunity. And it basically said that the whole prohibition on road construction, reconstruction, the prohibition on cutting and sale and removal of timber did not apply in Tongass.
That's right, and that's important because a lot of people don't realize that is the case. And so within the Tongass, it was like,
it doesn't apply if there was a draft EIS that was put in, and then basically went out and it basically said that, all right, so we understand this is a special area. Of all the United States, this is a special area, and what are we going to do in here? And how are we going to treat it locally? And obviously, I think Dave's already kind of talked about some of the litigation that has flowed from that. You're looking at me like that was the last podcast.
That was the one. That was definitely the last podcast.
Well, and
this rule comes out, and then you have a number of states are challenging it because of the way it came out. They're dissatisfied with the result, or the specificity or lack of specificity in the areas that are impacted, and the ability to continue and have roads and economic activities in those states at the decision done at a national level. And so there was a variety of litigation, and Alaska's always kind of been that question of what's going on.
And not just litigation, but in 2007, Congress attached a rider under the appropriations process to stop the building of a road that the Forest Service was actually planning in the Tongass. They said, well, we can't, stop this other means, but we cannot fund it. And that was a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats who got together and said, hey, look, this doesn't make any sense. It's not economical to do this anyway. Why should we be paying for this road?
Sure, absolutely. And at the same time, you have the next administration after Clinton, so George W. Bush, trying to write an alternative version of the rule.
Yep.
And that gets challenged also. So there's a lot of things that have been talked about in Congress in the form of rule of the Forest Service related to Alaska in particular, and including this national forest in particular. So the latest is not the first.
No, and just to belt and suspenders this thing, all the lawsuits that I'm aware of that went through the circuit court upheld that 2001 roadless rule. There have been challenges, multiple challenges in multiple jurisdictions, and they've all upheld the 2001 roadless rule.
So the 2011, but having said that, the 2011 case that went in, there were four. We're getting super wonky here, but there were 3 timber sales that were specifically excluded in 2011, and those were by Judge John Sedgwick from the Anchorage Federal District Court.
Yeah. Okay. What's the relevance of?
No, you said they've all been upheld, and I'm saying that this is an issue.
But that's a specific sale. I'm talking about the roadless rule as a rule. The words on the paper.
Yes, absolutely.
That went through, that Clinton signed, that went into effect. That rule is what's in place today.
Yes. Nationally, in many places, but realizing that they're within the Tongass, that doesn't necessarily mean that applies within the entirety of the Tongass, because it doesn't in every case.
Oh, now we're going down a rabbit hole. I don't know.
We're gonna have to cut this now.
No, we're fine. So yeah, I think what Dave is talking about is the national roadless rule, and then you were sort of zeroing
I'm saying
out
this
on
is
a
why the
couple of
Tongass
cases.
it gets extra ugly, because we have this additional piece within the Tongass that now gives us even more to argue about.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm gonna move on.
Yes.
Okay. Roadless rule. Let me circle back before we talk about what's happening today. Now that we've kind of gone through all these different rules that are in place. And you touched on this before we got into this detail about the economy today in the Tongass area. But right now, today, and we said the extractive industry, the timber industry was, and some mining. That was the bulk of the economy when the national forest was established. But today, in Southeast Alaska, the timber industry accounts for 1% of all jobs. Less than 1%, I should say, of all jobs. Seafood processing is 8%. Tourism, as you mentioned, this being a growing industry, is 17%. So what we've seen is that timber industry has contracted a lot. It's contracted a lot from where it was 60, 70 years ago, in particular, when it was getting to its peak. And so what we've had through that contraction is there have been job losses, and families have been impacted, local economies have been impacted. And because of that, like any good governor would do, or congressional delegation would do, they're looking out for their citizens. You want to have a strong local economy. And so since that roadless rule was put in place, there has been an effort led by the governors of Alaska and the respective congressional delegation in Alaska. There's been this effort to try and find a way to either repeal the roadless rule judicially or by other means, or to exclude, which is what President Trump's administration is proposing, to exclude the Tongass from the roadless rule as a way of preserving that economy. Right? And so I don't think it's unfair for me to say that's the that's one of the big purposes of this proposal, this draft environmental impact statement that's out there, is to preserve the timber industry in Southeast Alaska.
If you go through that, and now we're going to get wonky again. It's going to be another hour and a half, Mike. Because
only you can prevent that, Nephi.
Only you can prevent. Is you're right, but it's be unfair to act like that is the only thing that's going on there, because the Forest Service in their new proposal, they've said, yeah, we're doing this. Part of this is it's timber, but and whatever you want to call it, they're saying that we're doing trails, we're doing little cabins, we're doing, they recognize the growth in the recreation economy. They're saying part of the reason what we're doing with this new plan, this new way we're doing things, is because of this. And so it's the Forest Service, at least in the Tongass, is trying to, whether they're doing it, whatever you want to say about their motivations, they're trying to loop in all these interests and treat it as a multifaceted issue.
Well, so that's not what the proposal is. I mean, the proposal is simply to remove the exemption, but in the justification for the removal of the...
we're making an assumption, I mean, you are too, of like, and the timber companies are looking at the same thing. They're looking at this and nobody knows how this is going to play out. What we're talking about is an exemption to the Roadless Rule. We don't know.
I'm not making an assumption. I'm taking as a matter of fact, I guess, what the delegation has said, what Senator Murkowski has said, what Secretary Perdue has said, that the idea here isn't to allow, and I'm going to try and take them on face value. The idea here wasn't to allow more logging, because you have a forest plan that sets that. The idea here with the exemption is to create opportunity to make the logging that does occur more economical, so you can target the more economical places, so you can rehabilitate that industry. They do also say in their justification that yes, by removing by exempting the Tongass from the Roadless Rule, that creates additional opportunity. If you choose to amend the forest plan to do so, it creates additional opportunity to have other outdoor recreation opportunities. So to build other economies in this area that right now you can't. And there's no official proposal to do that.
Multifaceted approach.
But that's in the justification, that's one of the things in there.
So is it really an exemption from the Roadless Rule if the Roadless Rule exempted Tongass?
See, but this is where that decision came
totally in. Exempted.
This is where that decision came in that was important in March of 2011.
Because you have 9 million acres that are in Tongass that are covered by the Roadless Rule.
Really what's occurring is, at least I think, is what the rule said, okay, we're going to exempt...
This is a complex issue. Let's go there.
Yeah, we're going to exempt Tongass.
Yeah.
And there'll be a separate special rule written for Tongass, an Alaskan Roadless Rule. And so that could have had a variety. It could have been, partially this or somewhat that. But they're going through that process now, and right now the idea is we're going to move forward with, as a preferred alternative, completely exempting it, as opposed to some regulation, partial, and all that. So
they're trying to exercise the authority that was authorized for Tongass in
2001.
That hadn't been done to this point. Mm-hmm. But they want to go all the way to saying complete exemption.
So if the original rule said, okay, we are going to exempt Alaska's Tongass National Forest from the Roadless Rule, if there is a separate rule that addresses it, theoretically a separate rule would cover some restrictions. However, now we have a separate Roadless Rule for Tongass that wouldn't have any.
And now, to make this argument even more challenging and
what argument?
Obtuse, this discussion about the Tongass is, remember that we're talking about the Roadless Rule on top of forest plans, on top of other restrictions, on top of other restrictions, on top of other restrictions. So for the logging industry, when they're looking at this, they're saying, look, we used to have the entire world, and you cut us down this circle into this circle into this circle, and then you made us go on, and then you did this, and then now you did this. And so for their perspective, they're saying, like, you took everything out of, we're no longer economical because of all the hoops you make us jump through to do this. And now, like, we just can't do it anymore.
I think that transitions well into the discussion of the likelihood of success on this.
Well, but before that, I do want to talk, because I think what you've done is and what we wanted to do, I think, is we want to lay out what are the two sides to this.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Right? And before we talk about the likelihood of success.
And because I'm wearing a flannel shirt.
You're going to take on the role of the
I'm going to go cut down a tree in your yard after we're done.
You break it, you buy it.
Okay.
Anyway. So there are several schools of thought on this, right? But really, we're going to generalize and put them in two schools. Right? And one of them is the protecting, preserving the local economy, and specifically within the local, because there's multiple facets to the local economy, but specifically the timber industry within that economy.
Yep.
Right. And you think there's some validity to wanting to do that?
Yeah, and I don't think it's not. So you say me, so being the guy that's going to make the argument for it.
You won the coin toss or lost or whatever you want to say.
Yeah,
well, you're the guy
control.
you're the guy that showed up with a lumberjack's shirt on.
So you get to take this side.
So there's a side of the argument that would say, you know what, we live in, for example, we live in Wyoming, and our former boss would say when somebody said, you come into the state, you come into the first national forest, the first national park, the first national monument, you come see these things, you come to see your grizzly bears and everything, but remember, we are not a zoo, and we have to make a living here. And the same thing might be said by those local communities in that area for all these decisions that are being made by people who are down here in the lower 48 who are saying, we have a vision of what we think that Tongass should be. Whatever you want to say, the elected officials in Alaska, the governor and the senator, who we're going to assume got the majority of the vote of Alaskans, are saying people in Alaska want to see this. And you can argue that, but I would tell you that if they thought that it was going to hurt their vote, they wouldn't be arguing in favor of this. So the argument would be that those local populations are saying, to at least a degree, it's important to us to have a healthy timber industry.
Okay. And I'll take that, kind of lay out the other side of the coin, right? And so you've got people both in Alaska and outside of Alaska that are looking at the Tongass and saying, we've got something here that is special, right? We've got something here that's worth protecting and preserving. Saying we have one of the largest carbon sinks on the planet, soaking up carbon out of the atmosphere, or keeping carbon from going into the atmosphere. Right? That's one of the arguments made. We have no threatened and endangered species in this area. We've got this incredible intact ecosystem with this incredible wildlife resource, and that's worth preserving. And oh, by the way, it's a national. It's a national forest. It's not a state forest. It's a national forest. And everybody collectively is contributing to the resource base, financial resource base, to support that national forest. And it's in the interest of the people of the country to see that certain places should stay undeveloped, right? Untouched. And there's a fear that taking, opening up 9 million acres of this national forest to the potential for logging somewhere within that 9 million acres, right? That wasn't already done, is unnecessary, and that it cuts against the desire to preserve these places, right?
Yeah,
so that's
for that group of people, for sure.
That's
for
what
that group on that
that's
side.
what I'm saying.
And what the other thing that's interesting about this, though, is you have the Forest Service now stuck in the middle of it, right? The Forest Service who's putting out a plan that's saying, what? That they actually do think that they can manage the multiple uses there. The problem is they're not going to make side A happy. They're not going to make side B happy. Because in order to do things the way side A wants, you're going to have specific significant restrictions. You're going to have oversight. You're going to have increased costs. In order to do what side B wants, you're going to have something happen, and side B may not want anything to happen. And so, there you go.
You're basically, you're right. You're
getting sued by someone.
You're basically at an impasse, right? Because you're talking about the economic value in this forest from the timber industry, and you said it earlier, being really these old growth forests with these 200 to 500 year old trees. Those are the same pieces that have the most economic value and most other value as well to those that aren't in the timber industry, and they're just at a loggerheads over it.
Yeah,
right?
Because one group would probably love to have all of them.
Like the pun?
Yeah.
One group would probably love to have all of them, and one group would probably love to have all of them. And there's where you run into your problem.
Right. So that leaves us with, okay, so what happens next?
Okay.
And where do we go from here? So first step right now is we've got a draft environmental impact statement out for public comment for 60 days.
Right. It was just a draft.
Did I say final? I think I said draft. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got, 6 alternatives. Yeah. And they've identified a preferred one, which basically says, all right, no roadless rule in this area. But maybe they craft something that's a hybrid, right? Mm-hmm. But you got to figure that, okay, they still need to come out with what their final sort of idea is, the final environmental impact
That's
statement.
not going to happen next week.
Nope, that's going to be 2020.
Well, because it's not, as soon as you make that determination that even if, let's just say, the roadless rule doesn't apply, that doesn't mean you're putting roads everywhere.
No.
I mean, suddenly.
No. Suddenly we have a final environmental impact statement in which additional comment will come in, and then you get to say, I want to do something. Point, there'll be a record of decision.
Yeah.
And then there will be litigation.
Yeah.
But even if there wasn't litigation, there still would need to be some changes in the concept of management within the area, which would probably require a plan change.
That's right.
The forest plan.
They're going to have to make all the proposals of where they're going to do what and how.
Which these days tends to take 5 to 6 years to get through. I mean, it depends on if it's an amendment or something like that. But if you're going
to if you're doing your every 20-year planning or 15 to 20-year planning, that takes 5 or 6 years. It seems like the plan amendments can also take that long. But they can theoretically go faster.
They can, and they theoretically are also going to get sued on that too.
Right.
And then that's just okay. Let's presume that we've now completely exempted the Tongass National Forest from the roadless rule. We have amended the forest plan to say we will allow logging in these areas.
And you're saying you've prevailed on litigation in both steps, or you haven't been sued? Let's just say you've done that.
Let's just say
nobody's sued.
Magic fairy dust happens, and there's no lawsuit.
Okay.
Right? It just
now it's a joke.
It moves along. We Trump has been elected for a second term, and so all the same decision makers are in place, right?
So you're doing just so we're clear, you're doing the best case scenario fast track.
Yeah, that'd be worth it.
Here's how it would pan out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I'll do the other scenario.
The reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got a change specifically exempting Tongass from the roadless rule. We've got a forest plan that has been amended. So now we're 7 years at least down the road. So we now have a forest plan that says, okay, roads are cool, logging's cool, everything's good. Now we need to actually have a sale of that particular timber in that area. But before we do that, we have to do an environmental assessment at a minimum, probably another environmental impact statement in those areas. And so there will be drafts and finals and comments. And what's magic fairy dust? No litigation. Mm-hmm. So you're talking at least another 2 years before shovel hits the ground, or we're even sharpening an axe.
And that's assuming that there are companies there to do that work and interest in a timber sale in these places.
Yeah, a buyer.
A buyer. For
right. Yeah, so you're looking at a decade minimum. So fast-cased, best case scenario for that interest, fast track it, decade.
Okay. Now, let's go with the worst case scenario, or maybe the likely scenario.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So you have your 60-day comment period, like you said. You have your final EIS, more comment. You have your record of decision, and then you have a lawsuit or a series of lawsuits.
With a motion for a preliminary injunction.
Right, to prevent it from going into place, the exemption from going into place. That will be, you'll start in the district court. That'll wind up in a circuit court. That's probably where it'll stop. But it'll take you, there might be a petition for cert to the U.S. Supreme Court. Who knows, probably wouldn't take it, but you never know. Anyway, so bare minimum, district court, circuit court, you're looking at several years for those cases to run their course. If you prevail there, and that's an if, and that's a big if, because that's a challenging circuit. This would go through the Ninth Circuit, which is a challenging circuit
or it could be DC, but go ahead.
It won't be.
Well,
we can get into who's going to file that lawsuit and what venue are they going to choose.
Correct. Just bear in mind, though, that when Alaska sued on the Roadless Rule, they sued in D.C. and Judge Leon ruled against them already, in 2017. So
Sure. Okay, so that happens. Now, worst case, you lose there. So best case scenario, you win that lawsuit. The winning meaning the United States successfully defends their rule, and they can then move forward. So that first phase, to get through those 2 rounds, you're probably looking at about 4 years.
So don't chain yourself to a tree yet.
To get through the district court and the circuit court.
Don't chain yourself to a tree yet.
It would take them a year to build the record and get through the initial preliminary stuff.
You will die.
Yeah. So we're looking, looking at 4 years.
4 years is safe.
Is a safe bet, right, to get through the circuit court.
It might be fast, too. But
and that could be a little fast. Yeah. Anyway, 4 years. Then you're talking about the plan amendment.
Yeah, right.
And you're going to go through...
And just to put a finer point on that, the idea right there that Dave is talking about is the plan right now probably wouldn't contemplate all of the ways in which the Roadless Rule needed to, or the lack of one, the exemption one, needed to play out. And so they would have to change the way that they have set aside things for management of the entire forest at a high level. So they have to accommodate.
They'd have to say what's available for timber.
Right. They would have to accommodate the new exemption.
Right. And so that would require an amendment. And you'd have the same kind of, as Mike mentioned before, the same kind of comment and timing, everything.
Can I just say the disappointing part about this is that in a lot of cases, there are parts of forest that really actually do need to be managed. And there are places where even if you're trying to grow a recreation economy, where you actually could probably use a road, and everything gets so wrapped around the axles in discussions like this and efforts like this.
For little things.
You can't get stuff done.
There are separate total side tangents. There's categorical exclusions that can apply for certain recreational spurs and that sort of thing, and trail building and things.
What makes managing natural resources hard.
But okay, so assume the same kind of timeline. So plan amendment, like you said, 5 years. We're going to be we'll be say 5 years to get through that, and then another 4 years of litigation. Because you'll have litigation there too, and it will probably go district court, circuit court again.
You guys should have heard the one of these that was an hour and a half long.
You're at 9 and 4 now. Actually, 9 and 5 because we're a year out, probably still from a rod. Yeah. So 9 and 5. Already you're at.
So what would have been 2030 before an axe hits a tree? Now we're at 2035 minimum.
But we haven't even done, now we have to do the timber sale and the EA or EIS there and all the planning. So let's just say we're talking minimum of 2 decades. And that is assuming that the political will is still there and you haven't had some sort of...
For something that they said in 2001 in the Roadless Rule, we're going to put a pin in this national forest.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what to do with this issue.
Yeah.
When the Chinese own the Tongass, this is going to go much faster.
So the point is, could it happen? Could there be timber sale and logging in the Tongass in our lifetime? Yes. It could happen.
And monkeys could. Yeah.
But there are so many dominoes that have to fall the right way.
And you know what's funny? We just made everybody unhappy now with this podcast, because what happened is everybody who's freaking out about this is now thinks that we aren't their friends anymore, because they're like, we're not taking this serious enough. And everybody who was hoping to be able to do some,
no, because
they're all sad.
If you've listened to this podcast before, you will know that you're going to get a dose of reality on this show.
I know. I'm just saying.
That's why we're here. We're here to provide you with, cut through the crap, frankly. And get to the.
I'm not getting paid to support or oppose anything.
We're proof that the truth doesn't make anybody happy.
And we're not telling anybody we're not telling anybody don't be passionate about this issue on one side or the other.
Yeah.
Be passionate about it on one side or the other. That's your prerogative. That's fine. What we're telling you is
don't riot in the streets.
We're saying because you're so passionate on one side or the other, the likelihood of anything happening is pretty minimal.
Yeah, we talked about this in our hour and a half version of this podcast. But just remember that these for every big object up here that we see that we get, that becomes super polarizing. There's a whole lot of energy we no longer have to work on the little things that we could actually sit around the table together and talk about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
So anyway, we're not trying. We don't want to minimize the importance of this.
No.
We don't want to minimize the importance of the industry to the economy of Alaska, or minimize the importance of these special places to people.
If you're making your living off of selling T-shirts that say "Save the Tongass," you just keep cranking those T-shirts out, buddy.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, we're not trying to minimize anything. What we're trying to do is a dose of reality. So folks that are reading these reports and seeing these news stories and seeing that the House Natural Resource Committee is going to hold a hearing this week on this proposal, a lot of it is political posturing. And a lot of it is just they're passionate people fighting. And when passionate people are fighting, it takes a long time to resolve things. And that's just where we are on this. We're telling you, it's fine to be passionate about it, but don't think that this is one of those people make a career out of things like this, single issues like this. So anyway, continue to be passionate on both sides. And we took an hour and 30 minutes down to 52. It's not the 20 to 30. But I'll tell you what, I think this was a concise 52.
Yeah.
If there's a such thing. I think this is so much better than the one that we recorded before.
I don't know that it is.
I don't either.
I do.
If you would like to find out, send $5.99 to
the other podcast is for sale. It's not for free.
But this one is for free, and you can find it any place that you get your podcasts.
That's right.
And so please go out. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. If you like this, if you're passionate about this topic, let us know. Shoot us an email, yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Get on social media at the handle @itsyourmountain on all the places that you go to social media. Remember that life is about experiences, so go have one.